Most of us are here. 8:01 on my little clock. So again, welcome to another talk here at Jhana Grove. And I know it's a hot day yesterday, it's supposed to be a hot day today. But I always remembered when I was a young man learning about how Buddhist monks would deal with temperatures, extreme temperatures. And then the one thing which I always remembered and recalled was some of the meditating monks over in Tibet. They didn't have to face hot, extreme temperatures, but of course they had to face very cool temperatures, extremely cold, devastatingly cold. Because if they were going to meditate in the caves, in the mountains, above the Himalaya mountains, wow, that must be really cold. And they wouldn't have any heaters at all. So they had to be trained to endure extreme cold. And how they trained was, of course, in their deep meditation. And after a while, when they meditated, they were finally given the test. And you had to pass this test before you were allowed to go and sit alone for days at a time in some of these frozen, snow-covered caves on the Tibet plateau. And the test was this. On one of the cold nights, you were taken out to one of the lakes where ice was melting into that lake. And, there were just monks there. So the monk who was being tested had to remove all his robes and sit naked, whereas a cold wind blew across the snowfields of that plateau. And he was allowed one blanket, which was dipped in the cold waters of the lake and wrapped around him. And he had to dry 3 blankets before the sun came up to pass the test. And when I heard about that, nothing ever felt cold after that. But it was actually just saying, people did that. It was just the power of the mind to do that. So here we have heat. So how can we endure heat? And I tell some of the monks over in Bodhinyana Monastery, saying for years they've been trying to get me to give permission to build a sauna. Have you got a sauna at your home? Or you've been to a sauna? You don't need a sauna in Western Australia. Just go outside and sit under the sun. Or build a little steel shed and sit in there. But a lot of times, whether it's hot or whether it's cold, the amount of influence we actually give to the peace, the pleasure, the stillness, or whatever it is, of those experiences very much to do with how you train your mind. And so if it's extremely cold, if someone comes along and says, oh, it's really cold today, it's really cold today, oh, it's really cold, it makes you feel colder. And if somebody says, oh, no, it's just ordinary, you don't feel it so much. The same as the heat. You won't feel it so much if you don't think too much about it, if you're nice and peaceful. Even like cool places where I used to meditate, even as a lay person, I remembered you felt cold at the beginning, but then after about 5 minutes, you couldn't feel anything anymore. You were frozen. It's only a joke. No, it's true. After a while, The body's very smart. And the body can sometimes just adapt and just find it's like temperature controls. But thinking is a problem, because thinking, that's what makes you really hot. So when you learn how to be quiet inside, peaceful, your bodily temperature goes down. Not just your bodily temperature, but even your blood pressure goes down. One of those stories was this young man who became a monk, one of the first monks who ordained here in Perth with us. And we went to go and give blood at the Red Cross one day. In those days I used to give blood twice a year. My argument was, well, it's not my blood anyway. You feed me, so it's your blood. I should give some back. All the food and drinks which I have comes from you, so I can give a little bit of blood back. But anyway, that of course you had to have your blood pressure taken before you gave blood. And I gave my blood pressure, it's on the records, nothing wrong. When this friend did his blood pressure, the nurse stopped. Said, hey, your blood pressure's really gone down. What's up? And she looked at him and said, you haven't been meditating, have you? I said, I'm a monk. He said, of course I've been meditating. I said, okay, you can go. Because I understood, just even something like meditation makes your blood pressure go down and your temperature go down, and you can become nice and peaceful. Didn't you ever want in your life to be cool? As a monk, as a nun, we're really cool dudes. Is that right? Well, please don't be hot. That's a bad word for a nun. Anyway, little by little we learn how to make peace with what we're experiencing. In other words, you can't fight it. So make peace with it and learn from it. Of course, obviously try and keep hydrated, but don't make ever any big deals about anything which happens in life. Learn to be peaceful. And little by little, as you become peaceful, you become much healthier and just more at ease with whatever happens in life. And as I say, if you haven't felt hot yet, I think I told this to the monks yesterday, could have told you as well, you're all going to feel much, much hotter than this afternoon. There'll be one day you feel really hot when you're in your coffin, being cremated. But until that time, learn how to make peace. So little by little, these practices which we do, they really do help us, not just in the path to enlightenment, but also just in the path just to be able to be at ease with whatever happens to us in our life. Little by little, the peace in our mind creates wisdom, which solves problems at all levels of your life. Simple things to very complex things in life. And one of those, this is the job of insights again. It's insights which create peace, settle problems, make life more easy for you. Maybe it doesn't always make life more pain-free, because pain is part of life, and the pleasure is part of life. But it's easier to cope with it. The Buddha used to say there's two types of pleasure, two types of pain, the mental and the physical. And the physical part, you're going to get that no matter what, because that's what happens with the body. You hit it and it hurts. You burn it and it hurts. But then, the mind doesn't need to hurt. And that was one of the wonderful sayings of the Buddha. Even though the body hurts, don't let the mind hurt. Don't let that be sick. It's just part of life. So one can make peace with it, accept it, and not react to it. And that becomes a wonderful opportunity just to learn and get the insights into how your body works, and just to how that sometimes we create disturbance, and we create discomfort for our own body. Why on earth do we do that? Sometimes it's just the bad habits which we have. But sometimes you notice the mind can be incredibly strong. And it can affect your body. That's one of the experiments which had been done. Again, and this was that group, the Psychic Research Society. And these were experiments which were done by top scientists. And they were also just videoed, and they were repeated to make sure there was no errors in the data as before. And that was when they hypnotized this man. And after they hypnotized him, they had on the end of a stick, there was a nail, 4-inch nail. And under hypnosis, they convinced this gentleman that the nail was red hot. It'd been held in, I think, a flame for long enough that it was really, really hot. The truth was, though, it was just at room temperature. And they touched this nail on the man's arm. Ow! He shouted in pain. You would expect that because he'd been convinced under hypnosis it was red hot. What I never ever expected to see was a blister come up on his arm, as if he was really burnt. But the nail was just at ordinary room temperature. You could touch it on a baby's skin and it wouldn't cry. It wouldn't hurt. Certainly wouldn't show a burn mark afterwards. And the question was, where did that burn mark come from? Even though there was no physical cause of it, his mind so strongly believed that nail was red hot, that when it touched his skin, he not only felt pain, but a blister came up as well. It was things like that give you some understanding of why. We say that you can create a blister on your skin with no real physical reason, just because you believe that the nail was red hot. So why can't you take a blister away from your skin? Why can't you lessen a tumor? Why can't you somehow lessen a disease which is going through your body? The argument is quite logical. It can be done. That's one of the reasons why every now and again, when through meditation, when through a person keeping a really good lifestyle, you hear those tales which I've told some of them to you, that diseases vanish. Why? And then you understand that this is just the nature of the mind's interaction with the body. The mind is a fantastic tool, but we don't know how to use it. To get to know it, understand it, strengthen it, and give it power. Once you have that power in the mind, amazing stories of what people do. But so, how do we get to know these things? Straight away, you've seen that some of the things I say, some people say it's a bit on the edge. Ajahn Brahm, you've been out in the sun too long. Your brain has been fried. It doesn't make sense. You say things which are just other people will question you about. But how we see these things, again, real insights, real wisdom on all sorts of things, very much depends upon just the energy of your mindfulness. Its power to see very deeply into things, to see way deeper than you've seen before. And I mentioned how that's done. I won't throw this time. What is this? It's not just a stick. It's full of incredible sort of details, which a lot of time we just don't have the language or don't have the time to describe. And that is the job of our meditation practice. Now, one thing which I hadn't mentioned yet, but I was going to mention, I'll do this now, is that when we talk about insight, for those of you who've been going to other meditation retreats, you often hear that, insight. Insight meditation, that's satipatana practice. And samatha, the calming stuff, that's anapanasati. I did mention yesterday there's no difference between the two. And now I'm going to demonstrate that once again by just reminding you of what even the Satipatthana Sutta teaches. The Satipatthana Sutta starts off with its preparations, the prerequisites, the preparing the ground before you even start Satipatthana practice. And that is, the English translation was having abandoned grief and covetousness for the world. Have you heard that before, that phrase? If you look at any of the old books, that's what they translate. This amazing term called Lokaya Bija, Vinaya Lokaya Bija Dhammanasang. And of course, it's wonderful when you are sort of, I suppose, a Westerner or well-educated, or someone who has never disbelieves what you're taught, but goes and checks it out for yourself. Because when you do, that term, Vinaya Loke Abhija Dhammanasang, I know it's Pali, I'm not just being scholastic, because if you actually look at that term, when I started reading the suttas in Pali rather than English, that term just kept on hitting me again and again and again, because it was repeated many, 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 many times in the suttas. It was Loke Abhija. That was a synonym, a word which was an alternative for Kamachanda, which was the first hindrance. What that meant, that term, was referring to the first hindrance. Dhammanasang was used in two suttas, meaning the second hindrance. So I then decided to check in the commentaries. The commentaries are just the verses which were used to try and explain in more depth what at that time people understood anyway, but somehow the language, old language changes, and we need commentaries to explain what it really meant at that time. And that's what the commentaries said very clearly. There was two major commentaries to the Satipatthana, the one which is to the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, and that was in the Digha Nikaya, and the one in the Satipatthana Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. And both of those say the same thing. The Lokaya Bija refers to the first of the five hindrances. Dhammanasa refers to the second of the five hindrances. Usually we call it ill will or aversion. And those two together, it was the idiom of Pali. When you mention the first two of a list, the others in that list are assumed to be there. And when you read Pali, a lot of time, you can see that so often. A list of, say, the Four Noble Truths, you say suffering and its cause, and it implies the other ones in that common list are to be expected to be there. It's an abbreviation. And so what that term means, and there's no reason to doubt that at all, is having abandoned the five hindrances as a prerequisite before you even do Satipatthana. And those five hindrances, if you don't know them, are desire and ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. Those have to be restrained, put down, lessened a lot before you start doing Satipatthana practice. That explains so much to me, because I know that I've said this a lot to people when talking about Satipatthana, that when I looked at one of the first books which I borrowed as a Buddhist was the Satipatthana Sutta translation. It was done by two Sri Lankan monks. It was a reasonably good translation. But one of the things I noticed there was in the foreword. How did they get to do this translation? Because what they did, they heard that anybody who practices satipatana properly, even within 7 days, you should at least become a once returner or a non-returner or something. 7 days. That's not much of your life to give to satipatana practice, and you become even like a non-returner or fully enlightened. That's why we did 9-day retreats. Give you a chance. But some of you have been doing these 9-day retreats almost forever. Are you enlightened yet? But anyway, these were 2 monks, and they went over to Burma to do this satipatana retreat. And after 2 weeks, no, they weren't enlightened. So they'd give it another 2 weeks. Still not enlightened. So they said, well, we're not enlightened, we might as well translate the book. So somebody else could maybe just figure out what we did wrong. Because even a Westerner, all the time which I've been practicing, your faith and confidence in what the Buddha said just increases every year. And so the Buddha didn't lie. He wasn't exaggerating. If you do satipatana properly, of course, within 7 days, you'll be able to achieve amazing things. So what were they doing wrong? And that was the thing which they were not emphasizing and practicing. It's just the preparation. Having weakened, lessened, almost abandoned the 5 hindrances, first of all. Those preparations are important. So once those 5 hindrances are abandoned, lessened, weakened, only then can you trust that what you see, the insight you think is happening, can be true. It was answer to the question. Somebody asked this in the questions in the box in the evening. What is truth? What can you trust? What is real? And what is just fabricated? What is just delusion? There's so many people in life, especially in religions and philosophies. It's amazing what people can believe in. Even when I started my religious searching, there was a group over in the United States who believed that the meteor was coming towards to the United States somewhere, and that just behind the meteor was a spaceship. And if you join this group, then you'll be safe. You'll be somehow beamed up to this spaceship behind this meteor. You'll be safe. Everybody, the rest of the earth will be destroyed. It's crazy stuff. But amazing how many people believed in that. And these were people with university degrees, had their own businesses and all sorts of stuff. It wasn't stupid people, intelligent people like you. When I read that, I thought, oh my goodness, what is this Buddhism? Is this any different? It's different because we encourage, I was going to say stress, but that's the wrong word. We emphasize, that's much better. We don't do stress in this Buddhism, in meditation. We emphasize the 5 hindrances. Look at those and make sure that they're absent. You don't desire anything, you don't want anything. You're not you're not averse to anything. The mind is still and it's not tired. The 5 hindrances and the doubt, which is another form of restlessness, always doubting when you don't really need to. All of those things are gone. And then what you see, you can actually trust as reality. And I thought that was a wonderful way of safeguarding everybody, so you know that what you see, what you hear, what you feel, it actually is truth and reliable, having overcome the 5 Buddhist hindrances. And the way to do that, again, is through calming the mind first of all, using insight and calm all the way. And not just insight and calm. What was the other thing which I just missed out? Metta, kindness. Remember Sam, Vi, and Metta the dog went up Meditation Mountain. And that kindness is, again, so important. It allows you to stay with things long enough to penetrate them. So the story always comes, how do you know that what you see, or an insight, how do you know if that's true or not? You have to be still, not want anything, not have any aversion, and then see what happens. And there's one of those stories from Ajahn Brahm which makes that very clear. And that was, he used to really mention this for how to deal with nimittas. Because I already mentioned this to you, the lights which come up in the mind. And sometimes people have a lot of doubts about this. Is this real? Is this not real? And sometimes when they come up, why is it they go away too quickly? And this was a simile, a metaphor. We love using these similes and metaphors because they make the problem very clear and also the solution very clear. And that was the story of when the forest monks, we used to go into the jungles, just with it was an umbrella and a mosquito net. And we just meditate in the forest, sleep in there. I've already told one of those stories about the mouse becoming so big that it was a tiger in my mind, simply because of fear exaggerated things literally. But we often used to go out into the forest, but we'd always manage to find, we had to find a lake or a river in the evening to wash and to get some water. We'd always have a little filter as one of our essential requisites for a monk. A little filter so we could filter our own water to drink, wash ourselves. I remember sometimes you'd be walking through northeast Thailand and you hadn't seen a lake or river for days, and you really smelt. Because it was hard work and it was sweaty and you weren't used to that climate. I still remember the first days when we went to one of our monasteries in Thailand. We ran out of soap. We don't go out shopping as monks. We don't go buying stuff. And just if someone offers it, fine. And no one tells you, what do you need? So we just didn't have any soap, so we just washed in water. And after a few days, the villagers, you could see their reactions as we walked past. Another few days, what's going on here? And soon, one of them, it took about 3 or 4 days before one of them was smart enough to remember, is there anything you need, Venables? Soap. And from that day on, we never ran out of soap. We always got some for us. But anyway, just having bathed, then Ajahn Brahm would advise me. He said then, put your mosquito net umbrella about 10, 15, 20 meters away from the water's edge. Because if that's good water, then in the evening the animals will come to drink by that forest pool. And some of those animals are dangerous. They don't really go out there to harm you, the animals, but sometimes they're very protective of the young ones, their cubs. So he said, just stay back and watch, see what happens. And what happens if, say, the moon is up and it's light in the forest? Some of the animals which come out are just the ordinary, the elephants and their cubs and the tigers and stuff. And when they come out, they will sniff the air. They don't actually look because their sight is not that good. They'll sniff the air, see if they can smell you. And also they would listen. And if you moved, or if you said, wow, look at that, then of course they know they're being watched. And most times those animals will turn around and run away. If you think a tiger is dangerous, if you see one, in the tiger's mind, the monk is more dangerous. More tigers are being killed by human beings than any human beings being killed by tigers. We are the most dangerous animal in the forest. So that's why the tigers run away, especially if they're like cubs. But sometimes they would come out, have a look, smell, listen. And if you were perfectly still, then the animals would come out, almost with their family, to wash and bathe by the still forest pool. And Ajahn Chah used to describe that. Sometimes what he saw was amazing. Just, these remember days before Nature Channel or Disney Channel, whatever you used to watch wildlife. And this was actually just real life. And you could watch that, and the animals mess around and play around. One of the things which I saw later on, much safer, this was over in a monastery. The monastery was abandoned. Hot weather, like today, I put some water out for the birds. And even down in Bodhinyana Monastery, outside the kitchen, you see the birds there. They're so tame now. Some of those parrots who wash, it's just totally undignified. Just the way they wash. But it's nice to see those. But in this particular time, I put a bowl of water out for the birds to wash. And I watched them through a little hole, a knot hole they call it, in the wooden planks, which were the wall of my hut. And I watched them in the afternoon. And this is something which any biologist, I wish I'd have had a photograph of this because you wouldn't believe what had happened. I don't know if it's happened in other parts of the world. But you put the water out there, and many, many, many birds would come to wash and to drink. And they formed a line. The bird who came first, obviously, was in front, and then the next bird. All different species, different colours, big ones, small ones, all different ones. And I never seen, please excuse me, I never seen Thai people queue up that orderly. And these were just birds of different species. And also what happened there was always like one bird would come along, big shot bird, and jump into the front, which at that point the other birds would get out of queue, peck him, chase him away. And after they chased him away, they go back in the queue again, exactly where they were before. They were so incredibly well organized. So does that happen in real life with other bird species? You haven't seen that? Ah. But anyway, I saw that. I saw that every afternoon. It was really good fun. So sometimes I wait for that. And hopefully, you're hoping that another bird would disrupt the queue to see what would happen again, and they would all go back in the same line they started off with. Different species. So little by little, you enjoyed watching the animals in nature. These were wild animals. And then after a while, that when those ordinary animals came out to the still forest pool, this is Ajahn Chah's simile. He said then amazing animals would come out. These were animals which were so shy, very rare to see. And if you moved even a little bit, they would know you were looking. And they wouldn't come out, even though they were thirsty. But if you knew how to be still and aware, some of the animals which will come out were amazing, beautiful. Animals which your teachers had never said existed before. And he said that's what the nimittas are, and jhanas. It's like nimitta comes out first time. Some of you experience that. Sometimes it comes out in the corner of your mind. You go looking at it and it runs away. Sometimes it just comes, it's like it's just testing you out. Are you ready for me? You've got to be very still and peaceful and don't react. Your job is just to watch, nothing more. Don't let those nimittas become scared or know you're watching. And then they'll come and they'll stay. And it'll be so beautiful as they play in your still forest pool of the mind. Then later on, after those come out to play, even more wonderful animals will come out to play. The jhanas, very, very shy. But if these deep meditations come up and you go, wow, yes, at last, yes, you've blown it. It'll go all the way back to the beginning again. So when these come up, stay quiet, just as if you were a wildlife photographer. Or even better than that, because I told this story many times. And one of the people who listened to it, he was a husband of one of the Thai ladies here. And his job was as a photographer. He was one of the main photographers for the Sunday Times paper. And his editor, I don't know if this is a good story or not, but anyway, I'm telling it. His editor said there was a rumor going around that Kylie Minogue had had a bit of a breakdown and was hiding on sort of retreat in Cable Beach Resort in Broome. And the editor asked him, do you want to go up to Broome just to check the story out, whether it's true or not? Now, if you were asked to go to Broome, like a little free ticket from your boss and for a few days, would you accept? Free holidays? Yeah, of course, I'll go. So he went up there, and of course no one knew whether she was really there or not. So he decided for the first time in his life to be a paparazzi. He actually climbed over the fence, crept through the bush with his equipment, and he saw her. It was a true story. Imagine what it might feel like. It's the biggest scoop in his professional career, seeing Kylie Minogue. No one else knew that. And he said he got out his camera. And he said he had to be really quiet. Just like Ajahn Brahm had said, not to disturb the nimittas. Now he could take that camera shot so mindfully, so calmly, so Kylie Minogue didn't see him. And went back, and so he got the scoop. That's not very fair on poor old Kylie. She needed a bit of a break as well. But it was interesting that he used some of these techniques of meditation to get the scoop of his career. The only time he's ever done that. But anyway, so sometimes you can see how you do these things. You have to be able to be quiet and not get excited. Be peaceful, be still. And then when you're meditating, wow, it's amazing the sorts of stuff which can come out in your mind, things you never expected before. And they become the beautiful nimittas and jhanas. It's a sign that your mind is still enough, courageous enough to let these things come out and see some things in your mind you've never seen before. So with the going back to the satipatana, I don't know why more people just don't emphasize this. That having abandoned the 5 hindrances, or at least suppress them for a while, so you're willing to not to try and get rid of things, or not to want things, you're still enough, you're not restless, you're not tired, you've got energy. And you know those states of mind. Even here, you know just what that feels like when those 5 hindrances are really weakened. Then instead you start watching your breath. And then the Anapanasati Sutta, it just tells you just how through satipatana, through anapanasati, you can fulfill all 4 aspects of satipatana. By doing anapana, you're also doing satipatana at the same time. No difference between them. And when I mention this because it does explain a lot about how mindfulness of the breathing actually works. And answers a question which many of you put in the piece of paper. Does the breath always there, or does it disappear from time to time? And you can't actually say it's always there, you can't actually say it disappears. That's just not a full answer. So the full answer is coming now. As you're watching the breath, when you start to watch the breath, breathing in, breathing out, whatever, you're watching that through what we call the 5th sense, through physical touch. You feel it as a physical sensation. And because you're feeling it through the sense of touch, the other senses, especially seeing, hearing, smelling and tasting, they are being subdued. So 4 of those senses are just being calmed down. You're just watching the breath. And also the other parts of physical feeling, of touch, are also being calmed down. You're not watching the feeling in your bottom, or whether it's hot or whether it's cold. It's one of the reasons why that when you start watching something like the breath, after a while, if you're good at it, you can't feel the heat in your body. In other words, you can be in a hot place or a cold place, you just can't feel it. Which means you don't overreact, which means the body just relaxes by itself. So you're just watching the breath come in, the breath go out. You're focusing in. As I said to many people in the interviews, that is just like when I used to travel on the economy class and you watch the in-seat safety video in the little TV, whatever you call it, in front of you. And then when you were watching that, you noticed that when you started watching it, you could see the upholstery on the back of the seat in front of you. You could see the plastic, grey plastic of the frame of that little TV screen. But then after a short while, I didn't notice the upholstery anymore. I didn't notice the screen. My mind fit perfectly. So I didn't notice the edge of the screen. My mind fitted perfectly into the screen. That answered a big question, because I've been to people's houses, on jhanas and visits and stuff, and you see these huge TV screens they have. They're massive. And I've also seen a person just watch a video or something on their iPhone, a tiny screen. What's the difference in your perspective? Can you watch a movie on a small iPhone? Can you watch it on a big screen? Perceptually, what's the difference? The only difference is your mind, when it starts looking, it just fits into the screen and stops there. And your experience of the movie or the TV broadcast or the news, whatever it is exactly the same. Because that's the nature of the eyes and the brain. It fits into the important part which you're watching. So that's why the edge of the screen and the upholstery vanished pretty quickly, and all I saw was just what's inside the screen. I must admit that, just on the same sort of subject, I did remember once watch a movie on one of the aircraft. I only watched it. I didn't listen to it because I didn't have any headphones. Remember those old days, the screens would come down? And this movie I watched was called Armageddon. The screen was right in front of me, I couldn't miss it. I didn't have any headphones. And that was brilliant, to watch a movie without any headphones. Try it one day. Because when I couldn't listen to anything, I saw what was happening. And most of the time I was laughing. It was one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. It was hilarious. It was a comedy. Because it's the music which actually distorts your perception and makes you think of all sorts of things which aren't real. So what happened when I remember seeing this, I think it was some meteor was going to smash into Earth. Of course, it wouldn't it'd into Earth. It'd be saved at the last minute, which always happens. Always the last minute. But anyway, one of these big spacecraft or whatever it was smashed into the meteor. It was out of control or something. Smashed into it, went bang, and flames and sparks were all over the place, and it rolled all over the place for about 5 minutes, great pyrotechnics. And then it stopped. And then it fell over the cliff, and it all started again, bang, crash, smash, so many sparks and explosions. And then it finally came to rest. Now, in real life, you would have been killed about 3 or 4 times over, even with one of those explosions. But the hero, I forget who the hero was, but everything went quiet. And he saw a hand come up and grab onto some sort of railing and put himself up. He survived. Not just survived. There wasn't even a bead of sweat on him. His hair was still immaculate. And that was too much for me. I just burst out laughing. And everybody else would go, oh, he survived. Oh, he's made it. And they looked at me as if I was crazy. Maybe, I wasn't crazy. They're the ones who were crazy, believing on all that stuff. But just when you don't have the music and the sort of sound effects, you have a totally different experience. So I always remember that. I thought it was really, really fun, really cool. But anyway, just that's totally off the point, because when you when you focus into something, everything on the edge and outside just disappears. And that's how we focus. And that's how things like the body vanishes. Just focusing on the breath. And the other thing just falls off the screen, like off the radar. And that's all you have, just the breath happening. That's a physical touch. Then what happens? Then it becomes a delightful breath. Sometimes I call it a beautiful breath. Delightful breath is probably better. But it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? What the heck is that? When the Buddha described it, he said that's the piti sukha coming along with the breath. It is a chitta sankhara. It comes from the mind. What's happening here? This happiness is being added on to something as ordinary as the breath. Even though that's its source, we experience this, and not as a, well, yeah, you can say it comes from the mind now. It's how you know the breath rather than how you feel the breath. Seeing it through a different sense base. So sometimes people say, oh, their breath vanishes. It doesn't vanish. It's actually transformed because you're seeing it through a different sense. You're knowing it rather than seeing it. You're knowing it rather than feeling it. And of course, that's why it becomes very beautiful. And then it gets even more just from the knowing. The ninth stage of anapanasati, you've got piti sukha coming up, lots of joy. You can still appears to be the breath, but delightful breath. And of course then the breath disappears, you're just left with the delight. And that's when, in the ninth stage of anapanasati, the Buddha said that's where we experience the citta, the mind. What actually is that? That is actually when we experience the nimittas. The ninth stage of anapanasati is actually where we experience the mind, probably for the first time, has this beautiful light or feeling in the mind. It's a citta you're experiencing. You're not feeling this. You're not seeing it. It's not one of the five senses. This one comes from the sixth sense, the mind. That's why whatever you experience, it's never the same as any light you see with your eyes. Sometimes those nimittas can be incredibly powerful. I mentioned sometimes you feel that you're going to go blind. So you remember you're not seeing it with your eyes, you're seeing it with your mind. It's a mind sense. And sometimes you feel that it's just too much bliss. It's not, you're not experiencing it through the body, this is through the mind. So this is actually the sixth sense starting to manifest. And of course, as you brighten up that nimitta, was it sampasadanang cittang and samadahang cittang, that's calming it down, making it stable. This is actually what happens when you do the nimitta practices. And after you've done those nimitta practices, the nimitta is very powerful, very beautiful, and it's very stable. And of course it's called vimochayang cittang. You free that mind. And that is always a simile. You can see that many, many times in the sutras. That's a simile for entering the jhanas. That's how they used to say it. So even those, part of anapanasati, in the second of the four stages, you're not really experiencing the breath as a physical feeling anymore. It's you're knowing the mind. And in the third set of four, you're actually just letting the physical stuff go so far away that you're just knowing the mind. And the breath has done its job. It's got you that far. You don't have to go back and start looking for the breath and disturb the way to the development of the nimitta and allowing it to lead you into the jhanas. So this is the four satipatanas. I say only three so far. The fourth satipatana is what happens when you come out of the meditation, of the jhana. You have all this new data. This is data which you can't get anywhere else. Someone asked me to mention the simile of the tadpole and the frog. And just how when you're a frog, things have disappeared which have never disappeared before, fully disappeared. Or as the Buddha used to say, the only way you can know what real gold is, its properties, is to have 100% pure gold. When there's no sort of other elements inside that gold, it's 100% pure, then you can find out what it is, how it works. Same with your mind. You just got 100% pure citta mind, nothing else. Then of course you can find out what this citta really is. You get the data, and afterwards you come out, you analyze it. So these are little ways that when people sometimes say, oh crikey, you got insight and stillness, calm and insight, whatever you call it, and they think that one is different than the other. It never is. Always one and the same practice. One leads to the other. And of course, as a result of that, you get incredible insight and wisdom and power. You understand just how things work and just how the mind, the citta, what it actually is, and how it's independent, even of things like the brain. That's sometimes why, every now and again, you have what's called anomalies. That's what scientists who aren't wide enough in their understanding call it, anomalies. Things which happen which aren't supposed to happen. Such as babies talking. Little kids, 2 or 3 weeks old, talking clearly. Of course, the first time that happened, it's a long time ago, a really long time ago, there was a story of this young man who was just born. And as soon as he was born, he could even walk. He took 7 steps and put his finger up and said, "This is my last life. I'm the chief in the world." Who was that? That was the Buddha. That was a story of his birth in Lumbini. And when I heard that, I thought, it's just what's called hagiography. You know, when you have a teacher, you have to always build up your teacher with special psychic powers and stuff. I said, that couldn't have happened. A baby walking and talking. Then over the years, you gather more info. There was a couple here in Perth. They weren't Buddhist. They were local Aussies, Caucasians. And they came to see us one day, years ago. Said, "Can we talk to you? We're not Buddhists," he said, "we're sort of nominal Christians. But something happened, and we think you are the only people who can tell us what the heck is going on." And he said his wife had just come home from hospital with a second kid. They had 2 children. and both boys. And to this day, I always remember there's Peter and Paul. And one evening, little Paul was in his cot or whatever. Peter was 2 or 3 years of age. And the mother and father said to their elder son, Peter, go and say goodbye, good night to your baby brother Paul, and go to bed. So Peter went up to the cot and leaned over and said to his newly arrived brother Paul, said to him, good night, Peter. Said to his brother Paul, good night, Paul. And then Paul looked at his elder brother and said, good night, Peter. And he was only about 2 or 3 weeks old when he spoke. Good night, Peter. And the parents just freaked out. They stopped what they're doing. Did we really hear that? And this time, both of them had put down whatever they were doing and were staring. And without any prompting, their eldest son, Peter, 2 or 3 years of age, said to his baby brother again, good night, Paul. And Paul again said, good night, Peter. And they said one of the other weird things was not just it spoke, but it spoke in an adult voice, not in baby speak, which was really weird. It never spoke again until it grew up, but I had to come and ask us what was going on. What goes on there is that the mind of that little baby, Paul, the mind was doing the work which the brain wasn't developed enough to do yet. It was his mind was speaking. There's many, many other interesting cases like that. There was, when I collect these things, there was a researcher called John Lorber, Professor Lorber, and this was in Sheffield University in the 80s, a long time ago. But at that time, his field of research was people whose skull shape was slightly abnormal. And people whose shapes of their skull, I wouldn't know the difference between an abnormal one and a normal one, but this was the expert. And he would invite people with abnormal skull shapes into his research program. And just, for a few pounds or a couple of pints of beer or something, and they were students, so there was not much to do. But anyway, he wanted to find out if you had an abnormal skull shape, whether that affected your intelligence, your social skills, or everything else, your health. And one of the people he noticed at that university was a graduate student in mathematics. He's already graduated. He was doing research in maths. And so he had a slightly deformed skull shape. So I asked him if he could come to the program. He agreed. And the first thing they did was do a simple CT scan of his brain. And that is where, so sometimes they say, please excuse me, but it sort of defines what happened next. The shit hit the fan. He didn't have a brain. There was nothing in there. 99.9% was cerebral fluid. Had a tiny cortex, but no amygdala or anything else like that, which normally has to be there for a person to function. It was just brain fluid, nothing else. He had a girlfriend. He was socially absolutely normal. He was highly intelligent. He was a boy with no brain. Now, I always like to help with research like that, so I'm going to ask you all now, can you please move your head from side to side? Can you hear any sloshing? If you hear any sloshing, like liquid moving from side to side, maybe you just got cerebral fluid and nothing else in there. But he was a perfectly normal young man. Actually, he wasn't normal. He was better than normal. A PhD student in maths, socially normal, nice girlfriend, and healthy. And that was really, it just shows what happens. The mind can take over from the brain. That's what happens in hypnosis. You remember things through your mind, not through your brain. Because you're remembering it through your mind, you can remember early lives and past lives and all sorts of interesting stuff. It's not knowing it through your brain anymore. It's not something stored somewhere in your body, something much more interesting. So little by little we understand the power of this mind and what it actually does and what rebirth really means and how it gets reborn and what karma means and how karma works. And little by little these are insights which become very clear to you once you can access this thing which we call the human mind. As I mentioned earlier, for many years, the Indians, Chinese, even the Greeks, early Greeks, recognized that mind is an individual sense. Westerners, we've forgotten that. Instead, we'd only had 5 senses. And when a 6th sense, we call that materialism, just 5 senses. And the 6th sense, the mind, is just some byproduct of those 5 senses. And materialism doesn't mean just we worship stuff and think that we can measure our success and happiness by how much stuff we have. It also means that we have got no real understanding or even acceptance of this thing which we call a mind. And I don't mean just the intellectual part of the mind, I mean the heart as well. That type of stuff would be wonderful if in our culture it could be reintroduced as a valid part of existence, a mind. Fortunately in science, for many, many years it's been trying to disprove it. But then where it comes up very clear is again in quantum physics. More than anywhere else, there we have people describing existence as just a probability field. When a mind comes up and does an act of observation of knowing, it creates reality. Now you think that's just a bit of gobbledygook. That is known as the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, which allows now a mind, a 6th sense, to come into the equation as fundamental to our human world. I love it when it comes in. It just makes life less out there and brings it inside of us, the mind. Okay, I better shut up now because I've gone over time. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Hee hee hee. I didn't tell many jokes that time, did I? Oh, I do apologize, no jokes. Oops.